I'm Bob McRae, and I had the privilege of knowing Gary my whole life, and it was a real privilege. And I met him actually in, I think it was late junior high. I think Bill Dignan introduced me to him because he was playing basketball with him. And I recollect that when he first came over to my house, he noticed that I had built kind of a hobby at the time, a hi-fi, quote-unquote, amplifier, okay, a tube amplifier that I'd ordered from online. And I built a cabinet for my speaker and all that stuff. And Gary seemed to be fascinated by that, and so we kind of built up a relationship just based on that interest right away. And in fact, Gary eventually built his own amplifier kit and a couple of speakers to go along with that. His speakers looked a lot better than mine because he was a lot better craftsman and a lot more meticulous. But we had a lot of fun with that. We had a lot of fun with a lot of other interests that we developed over the years. Photography was one. He was a much better photographer than I. He taught me how to play chess, basically, at the University of Washington, not chess, but bridge at the University of Washington. We played chess together, did many, many things together. One of the things was mentioned earlier. We were both Popsicle Joes together for 2 summers. We were trying to find any way we could find to earn enough money to get through the next year of college, so that was what we settled for a couple of summers. Before we started that, though, we, at the Labor Day after our graduation from high school, we decided to take a trip to Seaside, Oregon. I don't know how many of you remember, but Labor Day at Seaside back in the early 60s was known for its street riots, basically. Kids, college kids and stuff like that rioting on the streets. So we thought, well, it makes a lot of sense to go down there and try and join in. So we packed up Gary's old red Lancer Dodge and some golf clubs and some camping gear, and went down to watch and see what happens at the riots. Well, the Oregon police were pretty sensitive to high school, college-age kids coming down and taking part of these things. So sure enough, they pulled us over. Gary was driving, and just as an illustration as to what kind of instant like Gary engendered in other people, he started having this conversation with the Oregon State Trooper, and they started talking about golf. And Gary said, well, yeah, we just came down here to maybe play a little golf in Oregon, you know, and take in the scenery and so forth. And he said, yeah, but they talked and talked. He says, got to be almost buddies right there. And finally the trooper apologized and said, look, I have to at least look in your trunk to see if you guys have got, you know, alcohol and stuff like that, because they're only 18 years old at the time. So he goes back, we open up the trunk for him, and the golf clubs are laying there on top of everything else. We had about at least a half a case, if not a case of beer underneath. But he felt so comfortable with Gary that he just closed up the trunk and we went on our way. Gary, in addition to being very likable to his peers and so forth, was always very well liked by parents and older folks, even at a younger age. And the most, the memory of that particular attribute is strongest with me, I guess, when Bill Dignan and I and he took a trip down to Southern California and then over to Nevada, where my wife-to-be, Darlene, and her family lived. It was the first time I'd ever visited her down there, and in fact, we had only started dating just a little bit before that. But I introduced myself to her family, and Bill and Gary were there, and we spent probably a couple of evenings socializing with them. So when I got back to Seattle and Darlene came back to school, I said, well, how do you think it went? Did it go okay? And she said, yeah. She said, my mom said to her, Bob, he's very nice. But that Gary is really nice. So I knew what I was up against. I've got a lot of things that happened to us here, but I'm not going to go through all that. I just want to say that I'm an old geezer, and what old geezers do a lot of times when they start thinking about things and looking back on all the good things and the bad things that have happened to them in their life. And one of the luckiest things that ever happened to me was I had a small group of friends that I met in grade school or junior high that stuck together throughout our lives. And Gary was the most outstanding example of that. He was like a brother to me, and I don't know how I'm going to get by without him around all the time. I still miss him every day. I don't understand how it's all happened. It was made even worse by the fact that we had COVID, so we hadn't had a chance to really get together very much socially for the last year and a half, so that makes me feel terrible. But I love the guy, and his family, I know, is going to miss him terribly, and thanks for the chance to say something.